Okay, everyone. So this is our last presentation today, and our topic is going to be Community Services Coordination Network, Children's Services and Adult Services through Developmental Services Ontario. So I'm going to just introduce our speakers, and then we can carry on. So Judy Wright is a Children's Services Manager for CSCN, London, Middlesex, Elgin, Oxford, Huron, and Perth. Sandi Evans is a Children's Services Manager as well for CSCN at the same location, London, Middlesex, Elgin, Oxford, Huron, and Perth. And Pat Weir is a Manager of Developmental Services Ontario for the Southwest region. And Liane Cormier is a Manager for Passport in the Southwest region. So welcome all for attending our program today. So when you're ready, you're welcome to proceed.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having us here today. I'm Judy Wright. As was said, I'm one of two Children's Services Manager, and I have the pleasure of starting today. So CSCN has three departments: Children's Services, the Passport Program, and Developmental Services Ontario. And we're funded by the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. We're going to start out with our Children's Services today, and our Children's Services serves the following regions: London, Middlesex, Elgin, Oxford, Huron, and Perth. And our program areas are coordinated service planning, wraparound, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, access, transitional age youth planning, and integrated transition planning. We're going to start with coordinated service planning. Coordinated service planning was part of the 2015 Ontario Special Needs Strategy. And while the framework for coordinated service planning is similar across the province for consistency and ease of caregiver navigation, we do have some flexibility in what our service looks like in our area to meet our regional needs. So we actually have 3 levels of coordinated service planning at CSCN and a caregiver information session. And I'm going to start with caregiver information session. So it's titled It Takes a Village. It flows on the school year, and it's a partnership in our regions to provide caregivers who are just starting out on their journey with their child diagnosed with a special need and throughout the child's lifespan to give families that firsthand information that they need to be navigating services on their own or how to get connected to services. And we have topics like navigating mental health services, navigating respite and funding options, taxes and financial planning, and how to transition into adult services. Then we can provide, the first level is family and team consultation. So anyone at any time, they don't have to have a client with CSCN, can call us to pick our brain on what services or what gaps there might be for a family that they're serving. And they do not have to give us the family's name. It can be an anonymous phone call. They can just be wanting some information or a one-time call to find out where there are gaps in services for that family. And again, they do not need family consent if they're not going to be giving us family information. Then we have family and team consultation. So that would be where they're assigned a coordinated service planner for the course of 3 months. The coordinator will attend 1 to 4 meetings, and the purpose of that is to build capacity of not only the family, but in the family's community team and supporting them and supporting their son and daughter in reaching their goals and navigating successfully through the system. And then we have intensive coordinated service planning, and I'm going to talk more about that now. And to do a referral, the information is there at the bottom. So for coordinated service planning, the criteria are the child or youth must be under the age of 18 or under the age of 21 and still in publicly funded school. The child must have multiple complex needs. So that does not necessarily mean they need to have a diagnosis. There could be a query for autism, a query for mental health, etc. But the child needs to have multiple complex needs or multiple areas of concern in their development. The family must want a team approach, and not every family does. So the family must consent to CSP because we really are bringing their entire team together around a physical table. We're getting back to that so that there's really creative brainstorming and problem solving with the family and their team. The family has to be accessing some type of service coordination already, and that can vary. That can be a family support worker, it could be a social worker, but often it's also a doctor. It could be a learning support teacher or a teacher or a principal. So someone has to be doing some sort of service coordination, and for whatever reason, the family's needs are far outweighing what they can do. The family must be receiving services from multiple sectors, so that speaks back to the complex needs of the family and their child. And the child must be experiencing significant barriers to accessing services. And an example of that would be a child whose behavior needs at the moment are far outweighing what a respite service provider could provide. So they can't go to out-of-home respite or have respite providers in their home. The family must have limited capacity to self-coordinate at this time. So that could be our refugee families or our English as second language families, but it also could be our single parent families or a family where a parent or a caregiver has an illness or a capacity issue at the moment. Or it could be that the family has multiple children with special needs and they can't coordinate all of the services for all of their kids at this moment. And the child is expected to have difficulty through life transitions. So coordinated service planning is laid out like this. First, we work with the family to develop their family story. So this is so that the family isn't having to tell their story over and over and over again. And that was very clear when the Ontario Special Needs Strategy was launched. And the feedback from families was they don't like having to tell their story to every single person they meet. So we develop the family story and we document it, and then we circulate it to their team for them and update it as needed. We work with the family and the child or youth and their team to find out what the strengths are of everyone so that we can leverage those strengths and utilize them. And then we find out from the family and the child or youth what their vision is for their family. What are their goals? What do they want to accomplish for their son or daughter? With that information, then we then work with the family first to create what their plan is to move forward. We develop SMART goals. So an example of a SMART goal could be that the family wants to obtain summer support for their son or daughter. And so it needs to be a very clear, concise goal that's measurable. So what's the goal? To access summer support, who's going to be doing it from the family team, and when does that need to be done? And then we have a one plan team meeting where we present those goals to their community team, and we find out who from the team is going to be working on those goals. Who's going to be the person doing that research on summer planning for the child, who's going to be filling out the applications, and when are they going to have it done by, to create that accountability for the family and for their team. We minimally meet once a year, but I think most of you who know coordinated service planning know it's typically once a month until the family's up and going and working effectively with their team again. And then it lessens over time. Throughout coordinated service planning, we provide ongoing support. We support the team in building their capacity to support the family. We're always doing planning, and that's throughout their service with us. And then we help the family move to inactive. So we are one of the only services that do not discharge families until the child or youth is 18 or 21. So once they're in our service, they stay with us. But when the family's doing well, when their previous level of service coordination can come back and meet the needs of that child or youth and their family well, when they're all reaching, when the family and their child and youth is reaching the goals that they've established for themselves, and they've checked off a lot of those goals already, and the family and their team are working effectively together, we create a transition plan to step out. And so that would list who their contacts are, who's playing the role that coordinated service planning was doing previously, and planning for upcoming events in that child and youth's life, and who's going to be helping the family through those life moments. We then move them to inactive, so a coordinator will stop calling them, but the family is able to call us back at any time. They can re-engage for a one-time call. They can call us to help them brainstorm on an upcoming transition or some services that they might need. But if they do need to go right back into intensive service coordination, they do so directly. They do not go back on a wait list. They do not have to wait. They simply call their coordinator back and re-engage, and we start again. So if you're going to be doing a referral to coordinated service planning, we need to have this information. We need to know the child's name and date of birth, the child's diagnosis, or what are the areas of concern they have in their development, what's the caregiver's name and contact information, and we'd love to have an email address. Note any siblings in the home, because unlike most other programs, we actually work with the entire family. We had a family that a child was referred to us in Woodstock, actually, and when our coordinator went out to meet with the family, there were actually 7 kiddos in the home who all had special needs. So not only did we pick up 1 referral, we picked up 7, and we can do that with ease in our program, which is great. If a child or youth does not need a full coordinated service plan, one plan team meetings, we can still do warm referrals and connect them where they need to be. We need to know who the members of the child and family's community service team are, who's currently coordinating services for the family, and are they going to be available ongoing? Are we going to be able to hand back the family and their service coordination to them when coordinated service planning moves to inactive? A summary of any additional circumstances impacting that family, like poverty, homelessness, English as a second language, refugee, etc. And what are the languages spoken in the home. So Wraparound, I'm going to talk about next, is very, very similar to coordinated service planning in that it's a team-based approach. We work with the child and youth at the center and their family, so they're driving the process. We support the team of professionals working around the family, but differently, we work with the family in their natural support system. And then the family's ideas and what they want and need from their services drives the work of the entire team. So while coordinated service planning's goal and understanding is that a family and child will always need to rely on the paid service system, Wraparound is different in that we're helping the family build their natural support system to move away from the paid system. So we work with the family to create a transition plan that will follow that child into adulthood, that child or youth. And we work with the team to really be creative and think outside the box of the paid service system to meet the needs of the family. So like coordinated service planning, we do work with children and youth in Wraparound up until the age of 18 only. But typically we start with the child or youth around age 6. Wraparound typically doesn't work with kids younger than that. Unlike coordinated service planning, a child does need to have a diagnosis of a mental health condition because this is a Ministry of Health funded program, but the child or youth must have a complex presentation as well. So these kiddos may certainly have a dual diagnosis with autism or a developmental disability, but the mental health needs to be the primary concern. Family needs to have accessed and exhausted lots of different services and they just haven't worked for them for whatever reason. And the child, youth, and the family must have those natural support systems that will participate in the wraparound process. And to do a referral, you simply call CSC an intake, and a family can self-refer, or any member of the child and family's team can refer. Historically, families would have to go through the local resolution process to access wraparound, but that's no longer the case, and people can directly refer. And now I'm going to talk about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And I know I'm flying through this, but CSN is a large organization with lots of programs that we want to get to. So coordinated FASD service coordination provides short-term solution-focused consultation strategies and supports to children, youth, and families affected by FASD. But what does that mean? So eligibility for the program, again, children up to the age of 18 or 21 and still in school, and the child or youth must be suspected or diagnosed with FASD. So someone somewhere just needs to have said, we think this kiddo was probably exposed to alcohol use during pregnancy, and the family must acknowledge that. So the family has to be in agreement. If the family member, whether it be a biological parent or a foster parent, disagrees with that, we cannot work with that family, unfortunately. And consent is required. And again, you just call children's intake. It's a direct referral. Families can refer themselves. And so the program looks like this. Similarly to coordinated service planning, we build the family story with the family, the child, and youth. We work with the child and youth strengths and the family strengths and the strengths of their team. And we make sure that that's all documented, and that's where we start. And we help the child and family create the vision for themselves. So what do they want for their son or daughter and their family today, tomorrow, and into the future? Then we work with the child and the family and their community team to understand what FASD is. What does it mean for their son or daughter? And what does it mean for their family? How is it affecting their son or daughter? And then we can move into coaching. So we've worked really hard to ensure that all our coordinators are trained in all of the best practice strategies of intervention for children and youth with FASD. And we coach their families and the child or youth and their community team on what those strategies are and how to effectively implement them into their day-to-day life in home, school, and community. So we can train their school staff, we can train their guide leaders, their scout leaders, their sports teams. We can train anyone on how to best work with Johnny or Sally who has FASD in their program. Then we obviously do service coordination throughout. So we help families connect to the services that will help their son or daughter or funding sources. And we provide support to the family because often there's grief and loss with the diagnosis of FASD, and we help caregivers come to terms with those emotions and how to work through them. And then we work with the family through next steps. So what comes next for that child or youth? What services need to be coming in the future, and help that family create a roadmap for that. As well, because a family does not require an FASD diagnosis, If they are wanting an FASD diagnosis, we provide support for that. So as many of you will know around this group, FASD diagnosis is a difficult one to obtain across the province of Ontario and in Canada. So we do look to the Canadian FASD diagnostic guidelines to see what's required, which is a psychological assessment, an occupational assessment, a speech and language assessment, and a physical exam by their medical professional. And we help the family go through their documents to see if they have any of this information. We dig through OSRs, we meet with their school team, etc. We also help the family obtain documented prenatal alcohol exposure. This is required by the Canadian guidelines, and often families don't have it, so we will work with the family to try and get it. And we also help families exhaust all means of diagnosis. As I said, there isn't a lot of options, but there is fee-for-service at London Family Court or some other places out of our region who will do fee-for-service. We'll help families navigate that. We do have some FASD informed developmental pediatricians in our area who are working with our families, and we'll work in partnership with them to do anything we can to help facilitate a diagnosis. But as many of you probably heard, in the fall, the Ministry of Health did announce some Ministry of Health funding for FASD diagnosis in our area. That funding went to SOHAC, so that Southwest Aboriginal Health Access Center. But that funding is for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous children and youth. SOHAC has decided with that funding to flow it through London Family Court Clinic because they had the infrastructure to support FASD diagnosis at the scale that was needed. This is a small amount of funding for our 5-county catchment area, so London, Middlesex, Elgin, Oxford, Huron, and Perth. We only get 12 FASD diagnosis packages per year, so that's not a lot. So SOHAC decided to partner with CSCN, and all non-Indigenous children who are seeking an FASD diagnosis must be referred to CSCN. We then work with the family to make sure that all other means of diagnosis are exhausted. And that's a criteria for this Ministry of Health funding because it is so limited. And we then hold the wait list for DojiCon, which is the name of this initiative. So once we have a child or youth who is a candidate for this funding, they have to be 0 to 18 years of age or 21 and still in school. All other FASD diagnosis must have been exhausted in the community in which they live. The family needs to exhaust all financial possibilities for themselves to access a diagnosis, including insurance benefits, and we can help the family do that research. And prenatal alcohol exposure must be confirmed and documented. Then the work that we do all of the other work we do with FASD service coordination. So we do service coordination, we do the training, we do the coaching. But for those kiddos who are now on the wait list for this funding, we prepare an intake package for diagnosis. So we collect all the assessments, we get that prenatal alcohol exposure documentation and create a package that would then move to London Family Court Clinic with that child. We, in partnership with SOHAC, created a holistic priority tool, which determines how the kids sit on the wait list, who goes first into those diagnosis packages. And if we use all 12, that then maintains the wait list. We're constantly updating that priority tool for our kiddos to make sure that the highest priority kids are going in first. We meet with London Family Court Clinic when we refer the kids to them. So we refer children in 3 groupings per fiscal year, so 4 at a time. And when we do those intakes, we review the package with London Family Court. We make any accommodations for the family, so that can be hotel or travel, but that can also be how can the child successfully participate in the assessments. So implementing those strategies to help the family make sure that the child gets to the assessment and effectively participates in the assessment. And often that's a gift card to McDonald's, quite frankly, that the clinician will give the child for coming and participating in those assessments. And we help the family brainstorm all of those options because we know that this is really important work. And we participate throughout the assessment process, including attending the diagnosis at the end, if there is or isn't one. We then support the family and community team to understand what the assessments determined for that son or daughter. And then we help their community team understand what that assessment is and to implement those recommendations. And we support the child or youth in an active-inactive model similar to CSP until the child or youth is 18 or 21 years of age, so they can come in and out of our service as they need it. So for Indigenous Indigenous children, there's a bit of a different pathway if they should so choose. So HAC has their own diagnostic process for Indigenous children that utilizes traditional healing practices and the 7 grandfather teachings. But a family can choose to go to SOHAC for that, or they can choose to come to CSCN to go through our process instead. It's completely up to them. And then ongoing, we've created community practices in our regions for FASD and resource teams. We provide free training to any community organizations who would like to have their staff trained in FASD informed practice. And we're open to anyone calling us for consultations at any time. Okay, and now I'm going to hand it over to Sandi Evans.
Thanks, Judy. Hi, everyone. I am another manager of children's services at CSCN, and I'm going to talk about the services that I oversee. And the first one is our access process. So CSCN historically, right from the beginning, was responsible for providing equitable access to funded intensive services for children and youth. And so we developed a process many, many years ago, and we still carry out that process today. So it's for children up to the age of 18 who really require intensive services. So when we talk about intensive services, we're referring to live-in services funded by the Ministry of Health or the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. So for the Ministry of Health, we're talking about Vanier, Mental Health Wellness, Craigwood Youth Services, and Humana Services. So if a child or youth needs to reside at one of those programs, they have to go through the access process at CSCN. And through the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services, we also provide access to CPRI, intensive live-in services. So to make a referral, we have a package of information that we collect, and it's completed by the community case manager in partnership with the parent and the child and youth when that's appropriate. The intake package is detailed, and it contains all kinds of information about the child and youth and their family's needs. The documentation in the package is a number of questions that are answered to give us enough detail about the child or youth that we're considering making recommendations for. And because we're making treatment recommendations, we really need to know what treatment has happened previous to our review. So we ask for copies of assessments that have been completed, discharge summaries or updates from agencies that in the past have provided service to the children or currently are. And school information is always gathered because it's really important to the decision making as well. So once we've received all of the information that we feel we need to host a meeting, we organize what's called a local resolution meeting. And they're scheduled in the family's home community. So we do resolution meetings in Huron-Perth, Elgin, Oxford, or London and Middlesex. And we try to work around the family's schedule to, as best as we can, to schedule those local resolution meetings. When we organize the local resolution meeting, we form a committee who are standing committee members. They attend our resolutions all the time, and they represent other agencies that provide support to children and youth with mental health or developmental disabilities. And so they make up our committee, but we also ask people to come who can speak about the child and their needs. The parent always comes. The youth will attend the meeting if they're over the age of 13 and are able to participate. We always invite school representatives, extended family or close friends are invited if they have something that they can contribute. We often invite pediatricians or family doctors, psychologists, or any other clinicians who might be able to contribute to the decision making. So we have the meeting, and CSCN assigns a chairperson who facilitates the meeting. The meeting is typically an hour. So we use that hour, we let the family know that we've read everything in advance, but we still, want to talk about their young person and gather as much information as we can. We talk to the family and the youth about what they're hoping for. And then we consider if all other less intensive, less intrusive options have been explored and exhausted. And everybody who comes to the meeting gets to have a say. So the decision really before the committee is this a child who requires an intensive level of live-in service? And should we consider that for this young person? So the recommendations are developed and reviewed with the family, and then we talk about what the next steps are. So the next steps are, if a child or youth is identified at local resolution needing intensive services, and we're going to make that recommendation, we'll make a referral to the next level of meeting, which is called service system resolution. CSCN prepares a written document to summarize everything that happened at the local resolution meeting, and also what the recommendations of the committee were. And then, as I said, if the youth is referred to intensive services, we present them at the next level, which is the service system resolution. And that's where all the agencies send representatives if they provide the intensive live-in services. Families don't attend this, case managers don't attend this. It's a different level of meeting. And there, all of the service providers come together and determine which is the most appropriate agency to meet the needs of this child. And we then hold a wait list for each of the agencies, as well as they're holding the wait list and considering who needs to be admitted next. So that's access. One of the other programs I manage is called Transitional Age Youth Planning, often affectionately referred to as TAY planning. So Transitional Age Youth Planning is a service that CSCN provides on a fee-for-service basis. And our customers are the Children's Aid Societies, because Transitional Age Youth Planning refers to youth who we would have previously called Crown wards. The new terminology is youth who are in extended society care and have an intellectual disability. So our job is to assist and develop a transition plan from children's services to adult services. So some of these youth may be living in foster care or in a group home that's funded for children, and are going to need to make the transition to adult services. Because their parent is really the province or the Children's Aid Society funded by the province, there's special money set aside for these youth, so that when we do a plan from children to adult services, there's a budget we have to work with. So we work closely with service providers to develop a plan for these youth, for their adult plans, and the ministry and the parents and youth and everybody else who can help make a good decision about that. So we do this work in London, Middlesex, Elgin, Oxford, and sometimes Huron and Perth counties as well. And the last service I'm going to talk about is called Integrated Transition Planning. And this is, again, to help families transition from children's services to adult services. There's a lot of services that change, a lot of things end, and there's a lot of new beginnings. So our job really is to work with any family who could benefit from this information and assist them with that transition. So it's a collaborative process. We gather all kinds of information about the young people, and then we write a really detailed plan about that young person, including their goals, what next steps will take place, and that type of thing. It's really intended so that that transition from children to adult services contains no big surprises. So families know about ODSP, families know when to call the DSO, families know what they need to call the DSO. They know about what options there are going to be when their child's no longer in school. So it's a really detailed plan about that. So the school boards are really responsible for doing transition planning on a global perspective, but we ask them to let us know and to refer families who need a higher level of planning than what might happen at one school meeting. So a family who could benefit from a little bit more support or a lot more support to help plan for that transition. So we take referrals for that as well. And as long as we know the family is in agreement and is happy to hear from us, we'll take a referral from anyone for this service. And I think that's the end for me.
All right, I'm Pat Weir. I'm the manager with Developmental Services Ontario in the Southwest. As you see here, a map, this kind of shows you the areas that we're covering in the Southwest, so the 10 counties from Owen Sound, or well, from Tobermory, in fact, down to Windsor. So it's quite a large area. When Sarah and Dr. Nicholson asked us to attend, I think my intention was to ensure that you had an understanding of how you can assist, as clinicians, your patients that are coming in to access adult developmental services. But I think the place I want to start, and so Judy, if you could switch slides, I always take an opportunity to give a little bit of a history lesson, because for us in the developmental sector, it's an incredibly important part of our history. So in the last 150 years, as you can well imagine, things have changed a lot. In the late 1800s, we were housing people in institutions. The 20s and 30s, we were building those institutions in great numbers. And even up until 1970, in Ontario, we still had 20 significant institutions housing over 7,000 people. So the 70s feel like not that long ago. However, the good news is a lot of work has been done and things have changed. So in 2008, there was an opportunity to review as we were closing the last of those provincial institutions, and new legislation was enacted. So you can switch it. So now we have the Services and Supports to Promote the Social Inclusion of Adults with Developmental Disabilities Act. It takes more than one breath to say it, but what I really like about it is the fact that that title tells you what our intention is. It's really about ensuring that adults with developmental disabilities are part of our communities. And so we are recognizing that people can live independently with the appropriate supports in their communities where they want to be. And so I think one of the, the several of the things that we're focusing on is to ensure that we're, offering good support to people who have developmental disabilities, ensuring that they're getting better service so that they can get what they need. They have more choice about what it is they and their families are looking for, and that is more fair and equitable across the province. And so as a result of that, we had some significant changes. And in 2011, July the 1st, we had the opening of the Developmental Services Ontario programs across the province, of which there are 9. So our key function is to provide information. So whether it's by phone, in person, we do, we have a website, of course, we do community presentations to ensure people have the information. The main thing that we're doing, though, is we're confirming eligibility. We're assessing people's support needs using a provincially consistent package. And then we're also then linking people to the adult services that exist already. What DSO doesn't do is we do not fund or deliver any of the direct supports or services. It's an important distinction that people kind of forget, and they say, oh, call the DSO, there's funding, and that's not the case. So where do we get referrals from? Obviously, individuals themselves who have, feel that they have a developmental disability can make contact, families, caregivers, and friends, home and community care, health professionals, including hospitals, doctors, and psychiatrists, school programs, Ontario Works, ODSP, and a variety of community agencies across the region are making referrals to us. So what does it entail? Once they kind of make connection, we first confirm their eligibility is based on a psychological assessment. So a signed note from the doctor saying, yes, this person has a disability is not sufficient. I'll explain those criteria in a moment. Our intake can begin at any time, at 17 and a half. If you have someone who is younger, sometimes the programs through CSCN will reach out to the DSO and say, we've got this child, this youth is coming through in a few years. Can we just make sure we've got the paperwork we need to confirm eligibility? And we can do that ahead of time and then not begin the application process itself until they're 17 and a half. People who are wishing to apply for adult services can contact directly by phone, email. We have an online portal. So there's a variety of ways to access us now. So as far as confirming that eligibility, it's a significant piece of the puzzle. It's something we never had until this legislation was passed. In previous, service times, people, if you thought you had a developmental disability, you went to community living, you knocked on the door and said, I have a disability, can I have service? And if they could offer you service, they did. We now ensure that everybody coming through the door does indeed have a developmental disability. So this requires that psychological assessment or report signed by a psychologist or a psychological associate that says the person has a developmental disability in accordance with the legislation. We also verify their age and their Ontario residency. The reason this is important is that obviously if the disability has to have occurred before they turned 18 in order for it to be developmental in nature. We meet people, a great deal of the time who are 20, 30, 40, who have, lifetime of mental health or addictions issues, and they are disabled in their own right. However, if the disability did not occur before they were 18, it's not considered developmental in nature. So we look at their cognitive ability, that IQ test, that's the first thing that we looked at, their ability to reason, organize, plan, make judgments, and identify their consequences. We looked at how they use that information in their day-to-day life, their reading, their writing, their math, money skills, social skills, their ability to get around the community, take care of their own needs. And then we look obviously at that time of developmental impact and occurring before they turned 18. So the package itself consists of formally 2 pieces that are included and provided by the ministry and are mandated. We first write a letter of eligibility that is sent to the individuals. The new piece that the government enacted was that this letter now can be used to access ODSP. It speaks to the confirming their eligibility. They still need to meet the financial eligibility, but they are able through that not to have to get the doctor to complete that medical form that you probably all have done at least once in your careers. A certified assessor through the DSO then completes the package. They're certified by the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disability, that is the authors and owners of that supports intensity scale needs assessment. And so those 2 documents make up the application package. The first part, the application for developmental services and supports, fondly known as the ADSS, comprehensively looks at a person. We look at the information we're gathering at intake. We get to know them in terms of their physical needs, their eyes, their ears, their communication abilities. We get to know them as a person, what they like, what they don't like, what makes them tick, what works and what doesn't. We look at what services do they have in place already. And then we also look at additional medical information that can impact on their support needs and affect their care concerns. And then we also, most importantly, look at that caregiver. If there is an unpaid primary caregiver, whether it's a parent, a family member, but someone who is not paid to look after them, but is caring for them, how they're doing matters to us, because if they can't continue to do their job, then we've got some different issues in play that we're going to need to address. So all that information is gathered at the first interview. Then we complete the supports intensity scale. It's, as I indicated, it's a standardized assessment tool designed to measure the pattern and intensity of support needs. So we look at everything from exceptional medical and behavior needs. We don't look at diagnosis so much as what is the support need as a result of what's going on with them. We look at their activities around living in the community, being in the home, lifelong learning, whether it's formal learning or just knowing how to manage themselves in their day-to-day life. We look at employment opportunities and support that might be needed. We look at health and safety, their ability to call 911, make sure they can make doctor's appointments, those kinds of things, take medication. We look at their social interactions, whether at home or in the community. And we look at protection and advocacy, their ability to make decisions, keep themselves safe, and advocate for what they're needing. What you really want to know perhaps is, once you get in the door, what's there for them. And so through the developmental sector, funded through MCCSS under the adult developmental portfolio, are a menu of options. There are residential supports, including group living, which is 24/7. Can it be anywhere from 1 person to 2 people, sometimes as many as 3 or 4 more often than not. We're looking at supported independent living, people living in their own apartment or home and have support come to them. They don't need 24/7, but they do need someone regularly checking in. And we also have host families, not dissimilar to a foster family, but who will have adults with developmental disabilities live as part of their family. We also have community participation supports, those day programs that you may be familiar with. We have other community involvement programs that are out there as well. There's employment support agencies, the passport program, which you will hear about shortly from Liane. There's caregiver respite, both in-home and out of home. There's opportunity for some folks to provide some person-directed planning, that opportunity to spend a little time focusing on what do I want from this world? What are my goals? Where do I want to be? So that when I go looking for service, I know exactly what I'm looking for. And then we have some specialized services as well. Through Regional Support Associates, they offer some behavior consultation support, supporting caregivers and agencies in helping people learn how to manage their behavior differently. And then we also have adult protective service workers that provide support to adults living quite independently in the community, but need a touch point, someone that they can call if they're having trouble with their landlord, or once a month they might need to meet to make sure that they're budgeting their money appropriately. So all of those things are part of what the APSW can do. So all of these services are funded through the ministry. They are all voluntary, and a person must consent to accepting service. We do run into folks where, their caregivers feel that they need support, and there's a difference of opinion with the person who is in need of support. And so it makes it very difficult to navigate that. But we work really hard at helping the person understand their needs and what can be helpful, and hopefully allowing, for support to be provided. So that's kind of the menu of things. So then the other task, once the application is done, we've put people on the registry for service. Then the other role of the DSO is then to accept from the developmental sector agencies vacancies that come available. So when there's a group home spot becomes available, when there's a spot at a day program or a support agency, they will declare that to the DSO, and then we go to our lists and our databases, looking at who's the highest priority right now, who is the best fit for the available resource. We meet with the individual, we connect them with the agency, sharing information, and a decision is made between the agency and the individual to determine whether in fact that service will be provided. And an agency can say, "Ooh, I'm not sure we can we can do this successfully." And an individual might say, "No, that's not for me." More often than not, we are able to kind of come up with a match that works for people. Then the other kind of role of the DSO, and it's one that plays a large, it takes up a lot of our time, I guess, is that, is keeping our database up to date. So in the Southwest, I think we're holding, and this is a guess, I don't want to be quoted, but probably about 14,000 files on folks who have developmental disabilities across the Southwest. And so part of our role is also then to ensure that we know where they are, so that when we are able to offer service, that we're able to reach them. If we can't, then we can't find them, we can't give them service. So we are always asking for people, whether it's the individual themselves, their caregiver, agencies, doctors, that if you know somebody has moved and they're involved with the developmental system, that they make sure they keep in touch with the DSO in order to kind of update addresses, phone numbers, and primary contact information. If their support needs are changing significantly, if somebody has had an accident, or they've had a stroke, or they've had a significant seizure activity, and that has changed their support needs, we want to know that, because that can alter the information, A, that we have on file, but B, it may alter their priority in our minds around matching them to resources. Any change the abilities of the unpaid primary caregiver are important to us. If aging parents have an adult child with a disability living in their home, and they have to go to long-term care, or they pass away, or are unable to, for whatever reason, to continue caring, we need to know about that so we can offer what support we can. We do have some urgent short-term support kinds of mechanisms that we can put into play as we try to explore with a family or an individual how we can help them. And then we just really want to be clear about what their support needs are, and where they are at in the world. One of the interesting things that I've noted, having been with the DSO since its inception in 2011, is that we're seeing a changing profile on the folks coming through our door. So in my lifelong career in developmental services, I always thought I knew what someone with a developmental disability looked like. And as you probably all are well aware, it's a much more complex issue now than we've ever known it to be. And so we're finding when we have clear criteria around our eligibility, we're also then able to confirm eligibility for some folks that we might not have thought to include in our world. So, there's folks with significant mental health diagnosis, addictions issues, involvement with the justice system, significant behavior needs, just those or even those complex medical support needs, these are folks that also have developmental disabilities, and so are challenging our sector to adjust and support some people that have complex issues that we haven't traditionally supported. And so there's a lot of work being done to kind of build that capacity within our sector. I use this just to kind of, as we kind of head towards the end of my conversation, it's, for me, it's one of the, pictures worth 1,000 words moment. So what this chart shows is three things. So over time, you will see the dark green column shows those each year, how many applications we completed. The medium green, taller one, is the number of people that are on the 24/7 group registry in the developmental sector in the Southwest region. So that, as you can see, it's growing taller, increasing over time, and now probably exceeds, probably 2,200 people are in the Southwest waiting for group home spots in the Southwest. And the teeny tiny little light green one that you probably can't see really well because it's very small, that's the number of people that we have placed in group accommodations each year. So when I mentioned there's 100 people waiting for group home spots as of now, last year, so 2021, I don't have 22, 23, or 21, 22 stats yet. I will next week. We placed 57 people. So of 2,000 people, we had spots for 57. So I say that out loud to kind of, so that you understand why, when you're calling us asking about group home spots, that we're not able to provide them as quickly as you would like us to, and as we would like to be clear. And I think the last thing I just wanted to share is that the other role within the DSO that we've kind of been fine-tuning over the last number of years as those wait lists increase is the role of service navigation. We have an entire team now dedicated to those 2,000 people sitting on the wait list, ensuring that we have updated information, that as they're struggling, that they're reaching out. If there's a crisis, that we're able to kind of offer what support we can and guide them through other community services that are not part of the developmental sector, and making referrals to different places. So that's a very important part of the role of the DSO now, that has expanded very greatly in the last couple of years. And I think that's the end of, I'm assuming we're having questions at the end, so I'll let Liane finish up.
Hi there. My name's Liane Cormier, and I'm one of the managers at the Passport program. So I know I'm just going to do kind of a quick overview of the Passport program. So Passport program, it's funded through the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. So it's Ontario government funding. And we, same as the DSO, it's the same region. So it's the 10 counties from Tobermory to Windsor. So our agency at CSCN oversees Passport funding throughout that region. The Passport program, it is a reimbursement program. So it's funding that's annual allocations for folks, renews every April 1st. It's reimbursement, so folks have to purchase eligible items or services first, submit receipts, and then are reimbursed for them. The whole point of it, sorry, you probably hear my phone going off. The whole point of the funding really is for folks to get out in the community where they live. So be involved in whatever their personal interests are, for them to be able to use that funding to be involved in those things, to get some more independence. And then again, for caregivers to have respite, everyone to have a break from each other. As far as being eligible, you must be 18 years of age before you can access Passport funding. You have to have a developmental disability and live in Ontario. As far as applying, so Pat just went through the process for applying for developmental services. So it would be contacting the DSO and going through that eligibility process first, completing the application packages as Pat spoke about. And then at that point, a referral is made to the Passport program. Once that referral has been made, then there's just a bit of a lag time. Your name will come up and you'll be approached by a passport coordinator for the approval process. So you go on the wait list, the coordinator will reach out. So it talks about meeting with families. We're not actually meeting with families at this point in time in person, but we are meeting virtually. So a passport coordinator would reach out to the passport recipient or family just to talk about passport funding, to go over options. And then there's a number of service agreements and forms and just process to explain with passport funding. So that would happen over a phone call or a Teams meeting or things like that, just to complete that package. The agreement, as it sort of notes there, is that it's agreement with the person who's funding it is, with ourselves as the passport agency, because we will maintain as the role of being the communicator for folks if there's questions or issues. And then the third party in the agreement is Passport One. And just as a note, it's one of those things that changed a few years ago. Passport One's role is they're a centralized payment agency. All of the forms and receipts goes to Passport One. They hold the money for passport funding and reimburse people there. So once the whole approval process has gone through, all the forms have been signed, there's a number of different things that people can use it for. So community participation supports, that could be classes of any interest. It could be membership in a social club. It could be membership at a gym. It could be any recreational activity or event. It can pay for transportation to and from those things. It could be a day program. So things like that, as well as caregiver respite. So whether that's respite or an out-of-home program, paying for some of those, or whether it's one-to-one supports and it's respite in the home. Whatever works for a family, the whole point is that it's an individualized approach. Person-directed planning, so that's a specific tool to help folks kind of make a goal for where they want to go, how the direction they want their life to be. Passport funding, you can use up to $2,500 annually to pay for person-directed planning services, as well as passport funding can pay if you have a third party to help you with the paperwork side of things and sending in reimbursements. It can help to go towards those administrative supports. So when folks get passport funding, they really have three options of how do they want to administer or how do they want to manage it. They can decide that they'd like to self-administer the funds. So that's where they do the forms. They may purchase items that are eligible, pay for services, hire folks, fill out those forms and send them in for reimbursement and accept that reimbursement. Or for some families or individuals, that's not an option that they're interested in. They'd rather have an agency do that for them. So in that case, a transfer payment agency, there's specific agencies that can do that. It's not just anyone. It has to be an agency who also gets funding from the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. So for example, community living agencies. So that would still be working with the individual and the family to go through the goals and what they want to spend their passport funding or use that program for. But that agency would take care of the paperwork. They could do the hiring, they would do the reimbursement, and it just takes some pressure off a family. The third option is that folks could do a combination. And that really is an individual option. And when we meet with people, we go over what that might look like. So sort of some quick facts. At this point in time, passport funding, when people are eligible and are approved, it is a minimum at this point of $5,000 annually. So it can go up to, we sort of mentioned here, it's not very common. It can go up to altogether $40,250 per year. It's split between, if folks live at home with unpaid caregivers, they're eligible for a respite portion. The most that people can get for respite is $11,500 a year. If folks don't live at home with they live by themselves or they're supported through an agency, they're still eligible for this community participation supports amount. And that maximum goes up to $28,750 a year. These amounts are individually based, and all the information that's given through the application process through the DSO, So that really comprehensive package of what supports people need, that information helps to inform eligibility amounts for passport funding. The other piece just to keep in mind is that it's portable. As long as folks live in Ontario, they can take it with them. They need to let us know that they move, and then we connect them with the passport agency in their area. These are just some links to connect, websites at CSCN, the DSO that has some more information about passport, and then the funder, the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. So that's all for me. Thanks.
Are there any questions?
Wow, that was a very comprehensive presentation by the four of you. Thank you very much. Sarah would know if we have any questions. I'm sure there's going to be some.
Yeah, Dr. Nicholson.
Thank you. That was actually a great summary. So just in terms of what you were talking about, Ms. Wright, so first of all, the word complex gets thrown around a lot now. What does complex actually mean?
Complex means that the child or youth is experiencing challenges or struggles in multiple areas of development. So if a child just had a developmental disability and no other issues of concern, then they wouldn't be deemed complex.
Except that if it's in multiple, and I realize that it's not you writing the legislation, but if it's in, by definition, a developmental disability of results in people's development being disabled, which would imply that multiple different areas are affected.
Correct.
Okay, so all right, so it's a
The child is impacted in multiple areas of their development. So, I mean, you're right. I didn't write the legislation, but it's kids who are experiencing struggles in multiple areas of their life and multiple areas of their development. So, hearing, speech and language, learning, medical, mental health. You know, those kids have I always say those kids have a lot going on. They're accessing a whole lot of services for multiple reasons of development or areas of concern.
But apart from what you said about hearing just now, wouldn't what you just said describe somebody with autism?
Yes. And most times kids with autism would be deemed complex for sure. What is it between what CSCN offers and what a family support worker through community living would offer? Just because I'm not clear because I never know exactly who to suggest families should contact. Yeah. So to come to coordinated service planning, you have to exhaust your first level service coordination, and family support workers at CLL would absolutely be deemed that sort of first level. When I look at coordinated service planning and FSWs, family support workers are more on the ground with families on a day-to-day basis, right? So their role is to, go to appointments, help families manage their appointments, help fill out forms, navigate services, go to school meetings. They're on the ground day to day. I mean, often our family support workers here in London are driving families to appointments. They're sitting in on the doctor's appointments. Coordinated service planners wouldn't be doing that. They would be working with the child and family's entire team and navigating the team and who's going to be playing the different roles for the family. So who's going to be going to the doctor's appointment versus who's going to be filling out forms, because not every family has an FSW. So they may have a social worker who fills out forms. They may have a family friend who goes to appointments, and they may have a school person who's doing X, Y, and Z for them. So coordinated service planning manages the whole team, whereas a family support worker is working more individually with the family themselves.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. That really clears it up.
Any other questions?
Yes, that's Dr. Ben Goldberg. First, I'd like, before I ask the questions and comments about the coordinating committee, I'd like to congratulate you, Greg, and for convening and making things smooth along, and also Sarah Flanagan and Rob and the committee for organizing this seminar. It reminded me a little bit about Hillary Clinton's comment, "It takes a village to raise a child." Getting back to the coordinating committee and the history, it so happens that my wife, when she was president of the Children's Aid Society back in the 80s, was part of the committee that organized the first coordinating committee for children and youth in London. Also, during that period of time, there was the Office of Child Advocacy, the Child Advocate. I was shocked when I was Googling today what happened to the Office of Child Advocacy. Apparently, it was eliminated in 2018. And just a word about the child advocacy. It was chaired by Les Horn, who has passed away and who was honored for all of his activities. And we talked about, and I was part of the interministerial committee that took a look at individuals who couldn't be looked after in their own region. And Les and the Child Advocacy Office had a pile of money that could sort of supplant. I take it there's no such thing as an interministerial committee to take a look at what happens if the individual can't be looked after in southwestern Ontario. What happens then? Would anybody like to comment? Is there such a thing? Or somehow or other funding is transposed? Is there some advocacy or some appeal that goes centrally under certain circumstances that you get an extra pile of money?
Sandi?
Yeah, so there is some specialized funding. Yes, it was very unfortunate when the Advocate's Office was disbanded, I guess. And I understand that they talked about rolling the advocacy role into the job of the Ombudsman of Ontario. So they did do that, and we often work with them. There is some specialized funding. We don't present about it because it's really just not available. It's not something someone can choose or pick to have. It's highly specialized. It's called complex special needs funding, and it is available to youth who have multiple and complex needs. They must have an intellectual disability, and their needs can't be met in the general public services that are available. And so that's kind of developed over the years. The Advocate was very involved in the work of the development of that funding early on, and it still exists today.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Ben, for the history lesson. Any further questions? Well, we've actually finished on time.
So
I
Greg,
think, I think there's one more question.
Okay,
Well,
of course.
One-ish, but I think this is such a huge area. And first of all, Pat, it was nice to see you again. But the so I often get questions from parents about people with a diagnosis of ADHD and sort of or ASD who don't have intellectual disabilities. So are those people eligible for ODSP? I mean, my understanding was at least not through DSO. But am I correct in that or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. It will depend. I mean, somebody with ADHD would not necessarily be considered to have a developmental disability. It really is about that IQ. Like we're talking, an IQ of less than 70 with adaptive functioning losses, if we want to get technical. So if they meet that criteria, then they would. ASD, within the cognitive panel, we look at, as long as some of the subcategories within the assessment tool that's being used do meet our eligibility and there is adaptive functioning losses, folks with FASD and ASD can be considered for developmental services as an adult.
Even without an intellectual disability?
If within the cognitive testing, there are some impacts that are realized through their adaptive functioning losses, they can. So yes, we have, yes.
So, and Pat, I think your slide with the sort of group home numbers, people on the waiting list and so on, I mean, it's really disheartening.
Yes.
And obviously the population of people is getting older and older. I think as Olaf Plotsky said earlier, he had a patient who was in their 40s with Down syndrome or something, and that wouldn't have existed 2 generations ago. Right. And I remember asking somebody at MCCSS 5 or 6 years ago about what the government's plan, if there was a plan about group homes, and it must be a real art to be able to answer a question for 4 or 5 minutes and actually say absolutely nothing of any value. But I mean, do you know if there's a long-term plan for the government around what's going to happen as the population gets older and older?
No.
No, you don't know, or no, there's no plan?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm trying to be politically careful.
Yeah,
I don't know what the plan is. I think we continue to gather the data. We present this to the ministry. We present them with, you know, the information. They have access to it. You know, they're certainly working on, you know, there's constantly an involvement of their planning around it. I don't know what the long-term plan is to meet that, to meet those increased needs. I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, once again, thank you very much for the great overview of the programs and the services of the CSCN, and I'm sure that people will utilize that resource. Okay, all, if we can end now, but I would encourage everyone, and when they get the information for the evaluations and your certificates in the next few days, if that you would fill them out and reply. Also, we oftentimes will poll people as to future topics. So, and once again, thank you all for attending. And I'd like to thank Sarah for organizing the program and organizing us, which she has to do regularly.
And thank you, Greg, for your magnanimous and articulate hosting job.
At least I didn't slap anyone.
Okay, I wasn't really expecting that comment, but okay.
No, I was referring to the Oscars. Okay.
Oh, okay, yes. Yes, I think we're all glad about that also.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.